Well, Wes, we just had the shortest segment in MonsterVision history. 2 minutes of film followed by 16 minutes of commercials. But it's where the doctor tells Mom that she disapproves of the Freddy films and that the child shouldn't really be watching them. So, have you ever had child psychiatrists tell you that you were damaging the youth of America?
I've never had a child psychologist tell me that, but I've had ad nauseum questions from the press about that. And recently I hit upon this sort of return question. That is, if, let's say we take half of 1% being a significant response to something, and 20 or 30 million people have seen the Scream series, then half of 1% of that would be 20 to 30,000 people that should have gone out and murdered their grandmothers. You know, if there was any substance to that story, or even let's say if 10 people had done it, which would be an infinitesimal little fragment of a fragment. It doesn't happen. I mean, people don't go around and say, because there are 40,000 people dying a year in automobile accidents, we must get rid of automobiles. But they don't give that same functional necessity to film, to stories about the dark side of human nature. Whereas I do. I think it's very, very important to have these kind of stories, and I think that they serve a good.
Okay, let's get back to the film. It's a catharsis, right, Wes?
I think it's a catharsis. I think it's a you know, talking about something that's terribly, terribly germane. I mean, if you look at the amount of people that have been murdered in the 20th century, it's probably, you know, approaches 100 million. Well, that's a significant fact about human nature. And so to have very primal stories about the murderous side of human nature, I think is appropriate. And the fact that kids are worried about that and they're worried about the life they're going into makes it appropriate, I think, to have stories that involve murder, that involve teenagers.
Children need to be terrified.
I would be worried if I were trying to make it look really glamorous or cool to go out and kill people. But to deal with people like Sidney Prescott or Heather, who is dealing with the people who are not cool but are murderous, is, I think, trying to show that even though you are a decent person leading a decent life, something horrible could happen to you. And here's how a person like you deals with it.
All right, back to the movie.
Helping make hair loss history.
New Nightmare on TNT.
All right, that's a great scene where Julie gets it from Freddy. The two nurses in that scene are played by Lynn Shay and Jessica Craven. We have Wes Craven here with us. Two familiar names, Wes. Who are those actresses?
Well, Jessica's my daughter, and Lynn Shay was actually in the first Nightmare. She played the school teacher in the scene where Nancy looks out the door and sees her friend in the body bag. And she's the sister of Bob Shay. She's sort of a perennial favorite to New Line movies. I think she's been in several others of the New Line genre fare. But she's somebody I like a lot, and it was kind of fun to bring her back too.
Okay, Wes, before we go back to the movie, I got to ask you this because it's a topic of much interest to the fans of this show. Of all the great movies you've made, The Hills Have Eyes and Swamp Thing and The Serpent and the Rainbow, which we'll be showing right after this movie, People Under the Stairs, Scream, there's one you made that is sort of more repulsive than all the rest, and that's your very first film, Last House on the Left, in 1972. The movie is so intense that nobody will show it on TV. Now, how did that come about?
Well, you know, that's a good example of a movie made by somebody who thinks that nobody will ever see it. So I guess you can say that, you know, if I didn't have to worry about any censors or anybody that I knew seeing it and calling me crazy, at that period in my life, that is exactly the film that I would make. Sean Cunningham, who was the producer, who since went on and did Friday the 13th and many other things, basically said to me, pull all those skeletons out of your closet and just let it all rip. We had no idea that anybody would ever censor us. In fact, we eventually just released it despite the MPAA screaming at us that we were all insane. And we thought it was going to play in a little movie chain up in the Boston area, which is who financed the movie, a group of theater owners. And we never thought that it would cause a sensation so huge that it would be picked up by AIP and suddenly be seen by everybody. And nobody was more shocked or dismayed than I, who would go out to dinner with friends, and if they find out that I made the movie, they'd get up and leave, or, you know, take their children out of the room.
Well, it's probably the third most notorious horror film of the 70s after the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and I Spit on Your Grave. And when it came out, at first you got an X rating, right? Now, how'd you get rid of that?
Well, we get rid of the X rating the simplest way you can, which is essentially we just cut that piece of film off our film and spliced on an R rating.
Wes, I love the fact that you just took that rating, stole it. You're our kind of guy. All right, we're going to get back to the movie now.
Vision host Professor Joe Bob Briggs in Wes Craven's new Nightmare on TNT.
Nancy goes to hell. Or is it Heather that goes to hell? And Wes, that's a great set you guys built for the concluding Inferno sequence of Wes Craven's new Nightmare. What were you envisioning there?
Well, we talked a lot about, Cynthia Charette was our production designer, we talked a lot about what, sort of an earliest primal idea of hell might be, and that it was half palatial and half kind of full of fire, that it was very rooted in the earth. In fact, we had roots hanging down from the earth above, that there would be a lot of water, because I'd always felt in the movies where it had water that was always a very powerful symbology. And it was kind of sexual overtones to it. Some of the murals were kind of sexual and erotic.
Wes Craven, mild-mannered professor of humanities at Clarkson College in Potsdam, New York, decides one day he'd be happier if he just rented a 16mm camera, got some people together to make a horror flick, and here you are, 30 years later, still making horror flicks. Are you surprised?
Nobody could be more surprised than me. I had no background in cinema. I was raised in an environment where we literally did not see movies. When we made our first movie, we spliced it together with Scotch tape and had no idea how to put a soundtrack on it, because there was nobody even in the college that taught a course in cinema or anything. So I came out of complete ignorance.
Well, they do give you a little more money these days, don't they?
A little bit more. I still, by Hollywood standards, not that much, but we've gotten up to about the 20 million mark on some of our budgets, which is healthy.
Enough for me. You like blood, don't you?
I think blood is a universal symbol for life, for energy. There's fresh blood in the organization. You brought the blood to my cheeks. You make my heart pound faster. Invest when the blood is running in the streets. I mean, it's throughout our culture. And it is probably more than anything else the symbol of the very essence of our life and of our vulnerability.
All right. And now for the stunning conclusion of Wes Craven's new Nightmare. Roll it.
007 can...
Good grief, those credits are longer than the movie. 8 minutes of credits at the end of that baby. How many people did you hire, Wes?
The answer would be, I guess, half of Hollywood. I mean, Nightmare 7 had a great amount of special effects. It had, Freddy up in the sky. It had a very, very elaborate and, kind of hairy freeway sequence that involved, not only the cars that swerved, but every car that was on the freeway was a stunt driver. So that was, a big deal, shutting down an entire freeway every night for 2 weeks.
I noticed that there were credits for Eel Wrangler and Eel Double. Are those for real?
Yeah, well, we had moray eels, that we were using when she falls down in the one area of the underground hell. And then, of course, when she picks an eel up and stabs Freddy in the eye with it, that had to be a fake eel. So that was the Eel Double.